On today's show, the Cleveland Cavaliers win in Boston. It's their biggest comeback victory of the season. Donovan Mitchell goes off for 41 points. Evan Mobley had a huge fourth quarter, and the Cavs have all but locked up the top seed in the Eastern Conference. We talk about that and so much more on today's edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? My name is Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like my Substack, The Inside Shot, Cleveland Magazine, 92.3 The Fan, and a number of other stops along the way. I want to say thank you to you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see I'm in Boston right now doing the show from the court inside TD Garden. So make sure you hit that thumbs up button for me. Click subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode, of course, brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Cleveland Cavaliers go on the road. They beat the Boston Celtics 123-116. This game was a wild one. Cavs started off about as poorly as you could imagine. They were trailing 25-3 just over 5 minutes into this game. Nothing was going their way offensively. They were missing shots. They weren't even generating good looks early on, and the Boston Celtics couldn't miss. I think the Celtics hit 5 of their first 6 threes, and this just looked like it was going to be a really long night, a very disheartening night, and I think a night that probably would have raised a lot of questions about this team, fair or not. For Boston, Kristaps Porzingis didn't play. He was out with an illness. Drew Holiday didn't play. He's out with a finger injury that could cost him a little bit of time here. But the Cavs were in a tough spot. They started really, really poorly. They called the timeout. Things didn't get better. They got worse. They called another timeout. So ultimately, they were down 25-3 by the time they made their first substitution. Things did not work very well for the starting lineup, really in either half. On Friday night, it was bad to start the game. It was bad to start the second half. But then this team fought back, and they fought back in what I think is a really consequential moment. I can't sit here on this show and talk about how important I thought this game was leading into it and then say, oh, if they would have lost, it wouldn't have been a big deal. No, I do think it probably would have been a big deal. But the Cavs fought back, and it was really, really impressive the way that they fought back, because Boston was able to basically do whatever they wanted early on on the offensive end of the floor. They were generating great looks from three. Even some of the threes that they were making were coming on tough looks. But when you allow a team to find their rhythm the way the Boston Celtics did early in this game, those shots start to go in a little bit more. And you saw that over and over and over again. And this just seemed like a nightmare scenario. And then the Cavs put Ty Jerome in the game. They put DeAndre Hunter in the game, and things immediately flipped. The Cavs were able to, by the end of the first quarter, go from being down 22 to being down 12, which being down 12 is never a good thing at the end of the first quarter, or at the end of any quarter, obviously, but it was much better than the alternative, which was getting your doors absolutely blown off. So I thought that the response that the Cavs had was very important, because this is what I think is the most important regular season game that they had the rest of the way. Not to say that there aren't some important moments left, but this was the game that was circled on everybody's calendar, and it should have been. So for them to fight back the way that they did on national television against the team that is, and I think should still be, considered to be the favorite to win the title, but I think the Cavs showed that they're not far away from Boston, that they are on the same level as the Boston Celtics. What this night does is, to me, it reiterates that the Cavs, the Celtics, and OKC, they're all in a group together. Like, it is those three and everybody else. That is one of the things that I come away from this game with. So a big part of the reason why the Cavs were able to win was Donovan Mitchell, right? I've spent too long of this podcast without talking about how great he was tonight. So he finished the night. He had 41 points for the Cavs in this one. He really closed out the game. He was 13 of 26 from the floor. Now, Jason Tatum for Boston was absolutely fantastic. He had 46 points. I do think that you can make the case that just because Donovan was so efficient that it felt a little bit more impactful. And here's John Corrales
Great.
of Locked On
game.
Celtics,
Jeez.
who I've seen him the entire time I've been in Boston with nothing but a frown on his face. He's the grumpiest guy in basketball.
Just wrap it up. You've been talking for 5 whole minutes. You won. What else is there to say?
There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to talk about.
Good game, Cleveland. You got it. Good game. Good game.
You can definitely hear John Corrales coming up in May, because I don't see a world in which these two teams don't meet in the conference finals. But what Donovan Mitchell was able to do, as I was saying before I was rudely interrupted by John, was how great Donovan was. Tatum had 46 points. He was fantastic. But I think that the Cavs will take that type of game because he took 37 shots. And what I look at that too is 37 is a huge number. So it's not as if he was super efficient. Only 12 of those were 3. So they made Jason Tatum settle for 25 2-point baskets. And it's not as if all of those were at the rim. Some of them were mid-range. And Jason Tatum made a lot of those mid-range buckets. But they forced him into those tough shots. They kept him off of the free throw line. He only took 5 attempts in this game. And I think that is a big part of the reason why the Cavs were able to win. They were able to get Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown to a lesser extent to take the shots that the Cavs want them to be taking, right? So we see Boston. What do? They shoot a ton of threes. They lead the league in 3-point volume. That is their entire offensive MO. But the Cavs held them to only 39 attempts. In the first half, when things were not going well for the Cavs and they were down by 10 at halftime, when things were not going well for the Cavs, Boston took 26 threes in the first half. They shot the ball really well. That's why they had a lead, because they just absolutely – we've seen the Cavs do this with a number of teams where they'll go on the Cavalanche, right? We've seen how many Cavalanches during the season. Boston started the game on one. And that can be a tough thing to respond to on the road. 3-point shooting was a big reason why they started off as hot as they did. So that happens, and then the Cavs get them out of their game. They stop them from taking so many 3-pointers. They did a great job, I thought, in the second half, mixing up coverages. I thought they did a great job mixing in zone when they did mix in zone. And then you watch them force Boston over and over and over into shots that we don't normally see the Boston Celtics take. And yeah, they didn't have Drew Holiday. They didn't have Kristaps Porzingis, but I do think that there was a message sent that these two teams are, while Boston is still the favorites, they're still the champs, and until they're done in the postseason, they're going to get that respect and that appropriate fear, I guess, from the Cavs. I think that this is a message that, okay, yeah, they didn't have those guys, but the start of the game was 22-3. After that, the Cavs dominated Boston, and the Celtics went on a run to start the third quarter. But other than really, and this is something that is absolutely going to be talked about, I'm going to talk about this coming up, other than the minutes that the starting five played together, the Cavs dominated this game. And I think that's a really good sign. Donovan Mitchell, as I mentioned, 41 points. He absolutely hunted Sam Hauser. Sam Hauser, I played 38 minutes for the Boston Celtics on Friday night. And an easy pushback is here is, well, if Sam Hauser plays 38 minutes in the postseason, the Celtics are probably not in great shape. Like, that's not going to be something that we see in the conference finals if both these teams are healthy. And you're right, but he's an offensive weapon for them. And he didn't shoot the ball well on Friday night, but he was unplayable. Peyton Pritchard, another guy who's been really good for Boston this year, he was unplayable. Luke Cornett, who I don't know if he'll play in a postseason series for the Celtics, he was unplayable. He was a minus 26 in 19 minutes. One of the reasons, aside from how good Donovan was, aside from how good Evan Mobley was in the fourth quarter, which we'll talk about, aside from some clutch shot making from Darius Garland, aside from, maybe not aside from Ty Jerome, but the depth, right? Ty Jerome is part of that. The fact that the Cavs were able to play 10 guys in this game, all 5 guys that came off the bench had a positive plus minus, versus the Celtics really played 7 guys. They played Drew Peterson for 2 minutes. They played Torrey Craig for 3 minutes. So 9 guys saw minutes for Boston, but really only 7 played. The Cavs played 10 guys over 12 minutes. That to me is a really big deal and something to look for in this matchup. When these teams are at full strength, does it look a little bit different for Boston? It absolutely does. But it's not something as if they're some unbeatable team. And I think the Cavs showed that because, and one of the things that I talked about on Friday's edition of the show was there are moments where the Cavs, and they've done a great job this year. Part of the reason why Donovan Mitchell has been so good is he's taken a step back and he hasn't carried as heavy as a burden and as we've seen him carry in his first 2 years as a member of the Cavs. But this year, when he's needed to carry that heavier burden, he's capable of it. And I think he's fresher to be able to do that. Friday night, we saw him carry a heavier burden, and he reminded everybody that he's a superstar player. He's a guy that I think should be first team All NBA this year. He's a guy that I think should finish top 5 in MVP voting this year. It's not that he does this every single night. He doesn't need to do this every single night. When the team is 49-10 as they are right now, and a big part of that is because of the step forward Evan Mobley has taken. A big part of that is because of the step forward that Darius Garland has taken. And part of those things being possible is because Donovan Mitchell has taken a step back to allow those guys to flourish. Well, on Friday night, he took a step forward, and he was the superstar player on the floor for the Cavs. And you can't win a series against Boston, and the Cavs, I feel very confident saying they're going to see Boston in the postseason. You can't win that series without having superstar performances from Donovan Mitchell. If the Cavs are going to beat the Boston Celtics 4 times in 7 games in the postseason, they're going to need Donovan Mitchell to have games like this, probably 2 or 3 of those games. And Donovan Mitchell is capable of it. I mean, look at the 2 games that the Cavs have won against Boston this year. It's no coincidence that Donovan was great in both of them. The one in Cleveland, he was perfect, scored 20 points in the fourth quarter. This one, he scored 26 points in the second half, had 41 points total, hit 5 threes, got to the line 11 times, which was a really big deal. This was just such an impressive, outstanding performance by Donovan. And truthfully, the one thing too that I will mention before I talk about Evan or anyone else, the leadership aspect of it. Like, that is the one thing that Kenny brought up immediately in the postseason, in the post game, was when you're down 25-3 as the Cavs are, when things are not going your way, that the way they were not for the Cavs, it's easy to crumble. But he specifically singled out Donovan Mitchell as being the leader in those huddles, as being the one that keeps everything calm, never too high, never too low. We hear Kenny talk about that all the time. That was one of the things he brought up inside this building when the Celtics were up 25-3. It felt like this game was over. And I think it would have been really, really easy for the Cavs to crumble, for the Cavs to let go of the rope. Instead, they fought back. Donovan Mitchell led them to victory, both on the stat sheet with the 41 points and with the actual leadership part of that. Need to talk about Evan Mobley because what he did to start the fourth quarter totally swung the game, and that is a huge sign of a great player. We'll do that next right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's show brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. There's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. Plus, if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. FanDuel's live betting feature, oh man, if you use the live betting feature on Friday night, I was not, and I wish I would have. I really, really wish I would have. I was not perusing the FanDuel app during this game. I would love to know. And please comment on YouTube or tweet at me, whatever. If you bet the Cavs during this game to win on the money line when they were down 25-3, I would love to know what those odds were. But I know that if you did that, you got a great payout. So whether you're backing your team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3 like Donovan Mitchell did, you never have to feel like you miss your chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com, FanDuel.com for your one shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. Like I said earlier, you can find the show anywhere you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Plus, we also now have a daily newsletter, your one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. You can sign up for free. That's free right now at LockedOnDaily.com. That is LockedOnDaily.com. And you can start your day with the all-new free Locked On Cavs daily newsletter. Evan Mobley was fantastic in the fourth quarter against Boston on Friday night. He had 11 points in the fourth quarter, but he was the one, and the Cavs didn't necessarily, they started the third quarter very poorly, and Mobley got into foul trouble. They fell down by as many as 17 points. So they were in a bit of a danger zone. That said, they were able to, entering the fourth quarter, it's not as if the game was out of reach. They had fought their way back already, but Mobley was the one that pushed them over the edge. Like he was the guy that hit a three-pointer that gave them their first lead. I think he scored the Cavs' first 9 points of the quarter. And it's not just that he had 11 points in the quarter. It's not just that he had 8 rebounds in the fourth quarter. It's not just that 4 of those rebounds were offensive rebounds that kept possessions alive for the Cavs that really did hurt the Celtics. But it's that up until that point, Evan Mobley wasn't having a great game. And I talked on Friday's show about Mobley's performances in the previous 2 games against the Celtics, where I thought the last time I was here in Boston, I thought Evan was really, really good, right? He was a big reason why the Cavs were able to come back in that game, and they couldn't finish the deal. They couldn't get over the hump, but Evan was a big reason why. And then Kenny, after the game, talked about how they needed to have him more involved in the fourth quarter. And then the next 2 games, Evan wasn't very good. And then tonight, I didn't think Evan played very well in the first 3 quarters, but then he figured something out. And I don't know exactly what it is that he figured out. I don't know if the Cavs know. I don't know if he knows. I don't know if he would admit it, but he figured something out, because this was a night he just, as Kenny Atkinson said, wasn't feeling it. Like it was just not one of his nights. And that's going to happen over the course of an 82-game season. And you would prefer that not happen on a stage like this one, in a game that has as much importance, I think, as this one did. But the fact that Evan was able to respond to not playing very well for the first 3 quarters, dealing with foul trouble, couldn't really get things going offensively. Jason Tatum, I thought, did a great job against Evan Mobley in the first 3 quarters offensively, because Tatum was kind of, I don't want to say he was hunting Evan Mobley, but he seemed very comfortable attacking the bigs for Cleveland. That was a thing where, instead of, as we've seen in the past, the Celtics have targeted Darius Garland, particularly, like he's been the guy that they've singled out the most, as they want to mismatch hunt him. I don't want to call it a mismatch, but they were content attacking Evan Mobley. And we don't see that very frequently. And Mobley is, I believe, minus money now on FanDuel to win Defensive Player of the Year. He did have some big defensive plays in this game as well. Had a really nice block that I do remember in the first half. But we saw Boston content going at him, with Jason Tatum in particular. And in the first 3 quarters, that caused a lot of problems for the Cavs. In the fourth quarter, that didn't cause nearly as many problems for the Cavs. Tatum was 3 of 8 in the fourth, only scored 6 points. And the fact that they singled out Evan Mobley and they had as much success on Mobley, and Mobley was not good offensively in the first 3 quarters, for him to turn around, and not for the entire fourth quarter, but for a big stretch of the fourth quarter, the start of the fourth quarter, the fact that he was able to be the best player on the floor in a game of this magnitude, I think is vital. Like, that is something that means a lot. That is something that you think about as, okay, when the Cavs see the Celtics in the conference finals, when that happens and they need to pull out a game in the fourth quarter, whether it's right here on this floor behind me or whether it's back inside Rocket Arena at home, Evan Mobley can draw back on this experience. He can think back to, even if he is having a good game to that point in a conference finals game, but he can think back to, I've done this before in this spot against this team. Maybe it hasn't been playoffs, but this was a playoff environment in here. This place got really, really loud during the first quarter, and the Cavs quieted the crowd in a really cool way for them, which I do think is another learning experience that they can take, because the environment in the postseason, maybe in the first round, it's not going to be like this in Orlando or Miami or Chicago or wherever they end up in the first round for a couple of road games. Maybe it won't be like this in the second round against Indiana, Milwaukee, or Detroit, whoever they see there. But if and when they get here for the conference finals, it's going to be a crazy atmosphere. And the fact they were able to deal with that, the fact Evan Mobley experienced that, fought back through not having a great game, and really, really turned it up in the fourth quarter, I think that's a great sign for the Cavs. I think that's a great sign for Evan Mobley. That is, and Kenny Atkinson said this, that is the sign of a great player. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. We have seen Evan take, I think, a pretty big leap this year. I don't think he's anywhere near his ceiling, but we've seen him take a pretty big leap this year. And a night like this, despite the fact that, his box score doesn't blow you away. He finished with 17 points on 6 of 12 shooting, made 2 threes in the fourth quarter, 12 boards, 3 assists. That's not, Evan Mobley has had better box scores than that, right? Like, he has had better statistical games. But when you think of moments rather than stats, this fourth quarter, that stretch that Evan Mobley started the fourth quarter on, I think that's going to be a moment that you look at and say, oh, yeah, that's one to remember. That's one that meant something, because it's hard for me to sit here and watch this and think, we'll just forget about that. Like, no, this is something that should be remembered. I think Evan Mobley should feel very confident. I think this should be a confident boost for him in, a season that has just been absolutely filled with confidence boosts. That's something that I do think you look at and like, yeah, this is something that if the Cavs are able to get past the Celtics in the playoffs, if the Cavs win the title, if those things happen, which are all real possibilities, folks, I do think that the start of this fourth quarter, and of course there will be much bigger moments than this one along that journey, but I think that the start of this fourth quarter for Evan Mobley, maybe even throughout the course of his career, like the start of this fourth quarter can be a moment that you look at and say, okay, something clicked there. A light bulb went off. Not to say that the light bulb hasn't gone off a bunch for him, because it has. But that moment in this spot, in a game of this magnitude, I think that's a really, really big deal. And I think that is something that could pay huge dividends for the Cavs down the road. Now, when a team falls behind by 22 points to start the game and then falls behind by 17 points to start the third quarter, means not everything went well. So we got to talk about what went wrong for the Cavs in this game and how it can be avoided if and when they see the Celtics in the conference finals. We'll do that next right here on Locked On Cavs. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. If you're watching the show on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button for me, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. So the starting lineup, it did not go well for the Cleveland Cavaliers. The Cavs were down 25-3 with their starters playing before they made their first substitutions. That was Ty Jerome came in, DeAndre Hunter came in. Things went really, really poorly. Max Strus was the guy, and this was something that surprised me because in the previous games, and obviously Max did not play in the first 2 games the Cavs had against the Celtics, but in the previous games, we saw the Boston pick on Darius Garland a bunch. Like, they are a team that wants to hunt mismatches and then drive, kick, create threes. And we've seen them attack Darius Garland a ton. So I came into this game expecting, all right, they are going to just spam pick and roll, whether it is Darius Garland defending Derek White, or maybe the Cavs are going to want to quote unquote hide him somewhere else. Like, no matter what they do, Boston's going to try and do something to get Darius Garland involved in the action early and often. It wasn't Darius Garland. It was Max Strus. And the Celtics went at Max Strus over and over and over again to start this game. And that was a big reason why Boston built a 22-point lead in the first 5 minutes, because Max Strus could not stay in front of guys on Boston. He was getting beat off the dribble repeatedly. It was really, really bad. This was probably the worst defensive game Max has played. And I think he's a solid defender and he certainly does things well, but it makes you question whether or not that he's built for this matchup. Like, this could be a thing. And I did ask Kenny Atkinson about, not necessarily, I wasn't trying to necessarily ask about the starting lineup before this game, but I asked about DeAndre Hunter and finding lineups for him that do fit. But after watching this game, to start the first quarter, to start the third quarter, looking at the box score where Max played 21 minutes and was a minus 19 in a game that the Cavs won. And then you look at DeAndre Hunter, who he played 29 minutes and was a plus 21. If the Cavs see the Celtics in the postseason, DeAndre Hunter needs to be the starter. Like, he needs to be starting small forward for that matchup. Does he need to start for the Cavs to get by every other team in the East? No. Their starting 5 is great. Entering tonight, their net rating with the starters, with Max Strus with the core 4, it's like plus 33 or plus 34. It's really, really good. But against Boston, it's a different ball game. This Boston Celtics team plays a different style of basketball than just about everybody else. And I just don't know that Max Strus is the best thing. I'm not saying that Max Strus should be catching DNPs in a series against the Celtics, but I think that ultimately DeAndre Hunter is probably the guy that you're going to want to see in that spot. And Kenny Atkinson has spoken repeatedly when talking about these matchups against top tier opponents. And I think that he also speaks about it like maybe not top tier, but that next tier, like the Knicks, Memphis, Houston, as finding feedback, getting feedback or data points from those games. And to me, he got a pretty big data point. And I get it that it's a small sample size because it's a 1-game thing. But I look at this as, okay, well, you got the data point that against Boston, even though Boston wasn't fully healthy and the Cavs were, the Max Strus minutes with the starting lineup didn't go well. The DeAndre Hunter minutes, no matter who was on the floor with him, went very well. And as rotations shrink in the postseason, and I think that the rotation that the Cavs play against the Celtics in the conference finals, if that series does happen, probably not going to be 10 guys deep. But I just think that Max Strus probably has a place there, but I don't think it's in the starting lineup. I think if you look at this data point, if you look at the feedback the Cavs got from how their starting lineup performed, and it's not all Max Strus's fault. Like, it's not Max's fault that the Cavs offense early on only scored 3 points that first shift for the starting line. That's not on Max. But I think there's enough there defensively, especially with how well DeAndre Hunter played on both ends of the floor. Really, I think there's enough there to say, okay, well, I think we have to go the other way. Because the other part of it too, with Max, if he's going to be picked on the way he was picked on Friday night defensively, I do think that he needs to provide more offense than he did. He was 1 of 3. He only took 2 3-pointers. Now, Grant, like, his minutes weren't super high, but I think if he's going to be on the floor, he needs to be more of a threat offensively. And in this game, he almost looked a little gun shy to me. Like, in the second half, I thought he was passing up 3-pointers that he normally takes. Like, there was one on the wing right over there, pointing to it if you're watching it on YouTube. That's like, oh, Max is open. That he's letting that fly because that's what he does on a regular basis. And he dribbled it in and then threw it out to maybe Darius Garland top of the key. And that to me is just like, okay, that's a little different. And I don't think that Max is a guy who's going to have his confidence shaken. I think he's a very confident basketball player, which you do love to have. And I think is a really good thing about Max. And part of the reason that I think he's a good player is that confidence. But to see that happen and to see what happened to him defensively, and maybe you don't start the series like that, but I do think that should be a move that you look at and say that has to be one that you at least have in the chamber. If not, you start with it. I think it's something they should start with in that series in particular. And if you are doing everything you can, and the goal for the Cavs this year is not to beat Boston. The goal for the Cavs this year is to win a title. But to do that, you have to go through Boston. So I do think that despite what all of the advanced metrics say, I think at some point before the regular season, we should see DeAndre Hunter with the starters. Because if Max Strus looks as good as he does, and this is a very delicate thing for Kenny Atkinson to balance, because as a coach, you don't want to overreact to one data point. But the data point, I think, is so important that it's weighted a little bit more than had this just been a bad run for the starters against the Pacers or a bad run for the starters against Orlando. Like, if those were the things, okay, well, let's see what happens the next game. But because this game was elevated, because this game means so much, I think it is something that the Cavs, at the very least, have to think long and hard about. Again, it's not as if Max Strus can't play in a series, but I don't think that the Cavs in a conference finals game can afford to fall down in a 25-3. There we go. I don't think they can afford to fall down into that hole. I don't think they can afford to fall down 17 points in the second half. And the one other thing I will say about that, Boston often, this Celtics team over the last couple of years, they'll build up really big leads. They're really good at that because they're awesome. And then they kind of get bored and they let teams back into it. That's not what happened in this game. And I want to be clear about that. The Cavs got back into this game because the Cavs played awesome, not because the Celtics took their foot off the gas. It's really difficult for me to sit here and say, yeah, Boston took their foot off the gas when Jason Tatum had 46 points, when Jaylen Brown had 37 points. Those are not signs of a team that took their foot off the gas. No, the Celtics wanted to win this game. They wanted to win this game. I think they really wanted to send a message to the Cavs that said, hey, we didn't have 2 of our starting 5 guys, and you came into our building and still couldn't win. I do think Boston wanted to send that message. Now the Cavs sent a message back that said, we're right here. We're not going away. We are on the same level as you. So I think that matters, but I think Boston really did want this one. I don't think this was one where Boston lost focus. I think that the Cavs stuck to their game plan better and forced Boston to play the game that the Cavs want them to play rather than the game that the Celtics want to play. And I just think that is a really big deal. And that's a big part of the reason why the Cavs won this game. Now the Cavs are back in action Sunday afternoon against Portland. I will be there, of course, because I'm at every home game and I'm at some road games as well. So I will be back Monday talking about the Cavs, probably still talking a little bit about this Boston game just because I do think it's that important about what we learned from it. But I will be back on Monday with another edition of Locked on Cavs. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcast. And thank you for making this your first listen today and every day. So if you're on Spotify, hit that 5-star rating. If you're on Apple, 5-star rating, leave a nice review too. And if you're watching the show on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button for me, click subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked on Cavs content. I will be back on Monday with more Locked on Cavs.